Okay. Hello everyone, and thanks Ronan for the introduction. As Ronan mentioned, I'm an archivist by profession, so I've planned many a Heritage Week event based around archives, and I hope some of what I say today will be of use. You don't actually have to have archives to use some of these tips that I'm going to give you. It can be anything relating to even natural heritage, built heritage, but everyone can use archives to inspire or indeed inform an event. So this year I'm going to look, or today I'm going to look at how this year's theme of connections, roots and networks is perfectly suited to using archives. Now Ronan gave me this title of making use of archives for Heritage Week, but it's Friday afternoon, we've all had a very nice lunch, and I've gone for something a little bit snappier. So I've gone for adventures through space and time. I have a clicker here, I'll put it on, there we go. So that is what we're going to talk about today, adventures through space and time. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's often a perception that archives are quite static, that they're just these dusty kind of static objects. They can be dull in comparison to maybe shiny museum objects or beautiful archaeological monuments or a beautiful natural landscape or habitat, but you know, they have their own qualities. While they are two-dimensional and text-based, they're used very often as well to prove something happened at a very particular time in a certain place. But another way to look at them is that they are actually vectors through space and time. An archival document can convey people and places from the past into our present, and through our use and reuse of archives, it binds us through them into the future. Now that's very mind-bending for a Friday afternoon, I grant you that, so I'll move on. Taking place, for example, places are the intersection of a physical form, human activity and meaning. And the places we hold dear to us shape our connection to the world and are part of our cultural heritage and identity. These are our townlands, the landscape features, our urban centres, our biodiversity habitats. And they are the shape of the known world around us and our connection to it. So archives document these places and they link us to the people and the layers of history that accumulate over time in a physical place. So think of maps, photographs, letters, diaries, leases, title deeds. All of these things root a place in a particular point in time. And archives can't exist without people. People create archives. They feature in them, and they are frequently their subject matter. And then over time, new generations of people use archives, adding to the collective memory about people or places. And maybe creating something new along the way from the use of these archives, and ultimately creating or recycling our memory, place and time for future use. So again, adventures through space and time. So think of family history research and the networks and connections made between people over time through tracing family genealogies. Think about the communities of people across those various archival collections who create archives of various types. Think of networks maybe of workers, of musicians, of craftspeople, of scientists, of specialists, maybe even seed collectors. They all leave an archive full of information. Think of the diaspora, as Miles mentioned, creating letters from a new place and connecting with their place of origin, and what that tells us about our links to the past and to place. So moving to something a bit more practical, these are the kind of archives that might be useful to inspire a Heritage Week event, or indeed to use in them if you have access to them, and particularly related to this year's theme of connections, roots and networks. So maps obviously are a clear winner here. You can use them to illustrate routes and indeed connections between places, landmarks, place names, or indeed landscape features. So you could use historical maps to discover old railway lines, and you could forgotten trails, and I think Ronan mentioned earlier the old paths and thokers and schlies that may have fallen into disrepair or disuse. So you can do amazing things like walking trails, treasure hunts, before and after talks. You can use a mix of old and new, use GPS and historical maps to create a mix of old and new. or link a trail of natural habitats or local castles or monuments. This map here is actually a kind of a detail from a larger map that came into Offaly Archives a couple of years ago. And one of the interesting things on these maps is that there were certain features in the landscape which had disappeared. So and using historical maps at different periods of time, you can actually see how landscape features change. In particular, these maps, which were made by a map maker called William Larkin, had illustrations of very small lakes, which are now no longer there, but the place names still bear witness to the fact that there used to be a lake in the landscape. So there's lots of different things you can use. You can use maps to illustrate. Maps are available in your local libraries. You can in your local archives. But there's, as Miles mentioned earlier, there's loads of things online. There's loads of maps, loads of local maps online. And the other thing, if you do get into your local special collections or local studies library or archives, and in particular estate archives, if you have access to local estate archives, a tip from an archivist is that if you know those old parchment leases, they're folded over and they can look not very interesting, but inside those, when you fold them out, oftentimes you find an amazing map, and it's pristine and it's beautifully coloured and beautifully illustrated, and it can sometimes have more detail in it for a very specific piece of land or townland than you'll ever find on an OS map. They're usually commissioned maps, commissioned by landlords, and they're really very, very useful if you're researching place. And they also feature things that may have disappeared, like woodlands, outhouses, church ruins, little houses, or a development of houses. They disappear over time, but they're sometimes captured on these estate maps. And there's loads of digital map resources, as I just mentioned. The Heritage Council has heritage maps. Does anyone here use heritage maps? If you don't, I would suggest look it up. It's going to be brilliant for this year's theme. So heritagemaps.ie, you will get, it's just layers and layers of maps, spatial data, which is available online, and you might find some really useful detail on that. And then, of course, you have the Ordnance Survey maps. They're online, and you can layer historical information on that. You can overlay the newer maps onto the older historical maps and see how things have changed over time. So another very useful feature. So photographs, again, another very visually interesting archival document that you can use for Heritage Week. You could do something like an exhibition of a changing landscape over time. You can look at archival photographs of people or places, events, and map things over time. There's loads of photograph collections in local libraries, again, your local studies library or your archive. But of course, and as Miles mentioned earlier, there is absolutely loads of photographic archives now online and free to use from the comfort of your own home. So what I picked out here, which is a great resource, is the National Library of Ireland on the Commons. Has anyone used this? It's a Flickr site. So if you just Google National Library of Ireland on the Commons, you get access to their Flickr site of basically copyright-free historical photographs. And they're searchable by place. They're searchable by name and searchable by subject. So you could put in your local area and just a wealth of stuff comes up. So I just picked two here. One is from Dundalk. The archaeological monument there is from Dundalk. And the other photo there is from Youghal. And one of the great things people love to do is a before and after, or a comparative picture. So getting these old historic photographs and figuring out where the photographer was when they took the photograph, and taking a modern photograph and actually seeing the difference. That's an amazing exhibition, like a series of historical photographs of your area, and then doing comparative modern photographs to see how much things have changed, or maybe they haven't changed, and that's a story in itself. Oh, sorry. So the next thing, and this is probably what people really consider, I think I might have missed one actually, I was just going to go back. Oh no, maybe I haven't, sorry. Most people consider manuscripts as being what they think of when they think of archives. They think of, this very text-based, very heavy material. It's, you just look at it and go, God, I have to read all of that, but think of it in a different way. So the image on the left there is a cache of diaspora letters, which were collected in the US and are now donated to the University of Galway. And they're all digitized now and online. You can look at them. And they really are the connections and networks between people who left this country and went to another country, and the accounts of their journeys and their routes across the Atlantic and the memories they left behind them. And maybe there are letters that you know of locally that connect people and place and could be used to inspire in an event. Maybe there are letters about, the natural world. Maybe there are descriptions of, if you were doing a natural heritage event, maybe there are historic descriptions in local letters about the habitat that you want to conserve. But there may be letters between people, letters about place. There's so much in them. And diaries, which is the image on the right, they're another way to discover networks of people connected to the diary creator. Really interesting. These are like contemporaneous networks, and then there are the networks then that are generated over time. So you have descendants, progress, change. So it's not just the diary creator and his or her network or his sphere of influence. It's the networks that happen through time, over time. So again, adventures in time and space. And another lovely type of archive not featured here on the screen, but which is brilliant for inspiring Heritage Week events, are historic recipe books. There's loads of them scattered around the country from various ages. The oldest one I know of is from the 17th century, but there are ones from the 18th century, ones from the 19th century. But they connect to a food culture of a local area. And maybe they feature local ingredients or local food techniques. And that's a great idea for a Heritage Week event, cookery classes or some kind of cookery demonstration based on using old local recipes, that kind of thing. And then we have audiovisual archives. And these, again, increasingly happening online. And Miles mentioned Dúchas.ie and the Folklore Commission. And while he had his reservations about the quality of it, I have to say I have a great time for Dúchas.ie and its bank of local knowledge, which is digitised and available in increasing numbers. So the schools collection is completely available. That's very text-based, Miles mentioned that earlier. But they do actually also have sound recordings. So at the moment there's 209 hours of audio available on Dúchas.ie. It's searchable by place, person and subject. So you could put in your townland, put in the area that you're interested in, and see who has spoken about it. And it might date from the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. But what an amazing resource. And these people are speaking to us through time, through the wonders of technology. And then there are film archives. Has anyone ever looked through the Irish Film Archive? So the IFI has a film archive player online, so you can actually look at this from home, and they have all early film from all across Ireland in collections that you can play at home, and it's searchable by place. And I just put up the Board Fáilte film collection. That was like a Board Fáilte initiative from the 1950s, 1960s, and it has amazing footage of the countryside and towns and rural areas from all over the place. You can actually go in and search and see, is your locality represented there? And wouldn't a great event be to figure out, is there anyone living who's represented in the film? Are they still alive? And maybe you could do a cinema event and have descendants or networks of people who were involved in the film when it was being made come to have a look at it. So there's plenty to work with. And there's also oral histories, more local oral histories, not just the ones that are on the Folklore Commission. There's oral histories available by many groups around the country. One of the best ones I've known of is Queen of Clore in County Clare. Absolutely amazing cache of oral histories there. And the future. So if you know, you don't want to use historic archives for your Heritage Week event, one of the things to remember is that every single day, every one of us creates cultural heritage. Just by the things we do, the things we say, the language we use, we're creating cultural heritage every single day. So what we create today is the archives of tomorrow. So if you don't want to use the historic material, why don't you create an archive yourself? You know, your community groups can actually create archives. You can create an oral history project and collect a bank of oral histories relating to either your area or your project or the specific aims of your group. You can curate your social media so that it's saved for posterity. You can create photo journals if you want to create something that lasts into the future, and you can maybe join the Irish Community Archive Network, which is a Heritage Council and National Museum endeavour to kind of, I suppose, capture the recording abilities of community groups when they're keeping their history at a local level. And what amazing opportunities there are during Heritage Week to create archives of our newly arrived communities. Maybe there's an event you could host that would record the experience of our new communities. Maybe there's comparative traditions, food, song, dance, craft, dress, sport. The list is endless, and there's probably more in common than there are differences. So a wonderful opportunity to record the cultural heritage of that is being created every day. Again, adventures through space and time. So the takeaways from today would be to ask an archivist. There's not an archivist in every single county, but that's something we're hoping to rectify. But there are archivists in approximately, I think, 18 local authorities at the moment. But there are archivists nationally that you can ask, and there's always a willing archivist. Archivists are very helpful people, so please ask them, and they will help you as much as they can. And the other takeaway is that maps and photographs can be used to inspire a Heritage Week event. You don't have to actually own the maps and photographs. You can just seek them out to kind of enhance what you're already doing. To be creative, you can use. I've seen archives used in so many wonderful and creative ways. They're not just all for kind of research, academic research. There's all sorts of ways to utilise archives. And just to remember as well that it's not just all backwards looking, we're forwards looking. Archives are created every day, and you know, you're all part of that, and we will support you in every way we can to capture it. So that's it.